Awesome. Well, hi everybody. It's great to be with you today. I'm super excited to be talking to Brenda today, so welcome and thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Good to see you, Amelia, again
Yes.
today. I've had the benefit of being in a couple of sessions, and it's incredibly inspiring to hear from all of you, to hear what you have to say, to talk about your experiences. And there's hope, and I'm looking at it. So thank you for your commitment. I want to say thank you to Melissa for inviting me to come in to speak with you a little bit today, because I come from the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. I grew up on our tribal lands, and like Amelia, unfortunately, I have a feeling if I did a poll and asked how many of you knew anything about American Indian tribes in this country, the answer would be very few. So I'm very excited to be here to start this conversation.
Yes, definitely. So we'll go ahead and get started with our first question. So you were talking a lot about your story, and I'm really curious, as a Native woman attorney, how your lived experiences have informed your life's work.
Well, thank you, Amelia. So I grew up on our tribal lands in western North Carolina. It's the homelands of where the Cherokee people have resided forever. What some of you may know is that, how many of you have heard of the Trail of Tears? How many of you have heard of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians? Good, there are a few of you. So my ancestors, there were around 1,000 people who remained in western North Carolina in our homelands following the Trail of Tears. So we never left North Carolina. And we were able to stay in North Carolina because of a combination of factors: law, as well as the absence of action by the government of the state of North Carolina. We were so far west in the mountains of western North Carolina at the time, that was real estate that no one wanted. So we were kind of out of sight, out of mind. And one of the treaties actually stated that if a state agreed to allow the Native people in the Southeast to remain, they could stay. Well, we had Cherokee people in North Carolina, we had Cherokee people in Georgia, in Tennessee, down into South Carolina, Kentucky, and all those lands, via treaty, via an agreement between the Cherokee people and the United States, those lands continued to shrink. Well, knowing this growing up, knowing that I was a citizen of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, and being blessed to actually grow up in our homelands and to grow up living with my extended family who spoke our own language, who continued to practice our traditional arts, our traditional way of life, there was also another really harsh reality that I learned. And I learned very early that the laws did not protect us. Native women and girls were found dead in my community. We didn't say murdered then. That was too hard for any of us to carry. They were found dead. They didn't die from old age. These were young women. There were women who were victims of sexual assault, women who experienced domestic violence, and we weren't protected. The laws didn't protect us. Because we lived on our tribal lands, jurisdiction, in order to prosecute anyone who commits crimes against Native women and girls if they were not Native, rested with the federal government. As a tribal nation, the Eastern Band of Cherokee is one of 574 tribal nations or Alaskan Native communities and villages. 574. Our place in this country as independent sovereigns, or as the Supreme Court has denoted, domestic dependent nations, is protected in the United States Constitution. So who I am, who Amelia is, we are, as American Indian women, as tribal citizens, that is a political status. It's because I am a citizen of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, and the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians has a government-to-government relationship with the United States government. So just as some of you may have dual citizenship with the United States and with other countries, it's the same. I have dual citizenship between my tribe and the United States. But having our nationhood protected in our Constitution hasn't protected American Indian people. So how I have come to the law is because I learned early on that I wanted to advocate for the safety of myself, of my family, and now as a mother, for my children. I don't want my daughters, I have 3 daughters, one's 14, and I have 2 17-year-olds. I don't want them to become a statistic. We are more than statistics. But 4 out of 5 Native women and girls will experience violence in their lifetime. 1 of 2 Native women and girls will experience sexual violence. These are really, really harsh realities. We need to have laws on the books, but we also need to have people to have knowledge of those laws so that people can protect people. And one of the things that, and just an example of how some of the laws that we have had to advocate as Native peoples, some of you may have heard of the United States Supreme Court case that was just recently passed, the Holland versus Brackeen. Any of you familiar with that? Have you heard of that? I see a few hands. Wonderful. So the Indian Child Welfare Act was passed in 1978. And for those of you who aren't aware of it, Native women and tribal nations advocated and fought for this law because our children were being taken away from us. When my children were born, they had dark spots on their back. I remember when I was a child, having family members be afraid because those dark spots, I didn't hit my children. But social workers would see those dark spots that were just, it was like a birthmark. And then it goes away as they get older. And I don't know where they come from, but my children had them. But children were taken away because people didn't understand. And they assumed that they were being abused. They were being taken away from their families and placed for adoption. So in 1978, we finally got a law passed that said that wherever a Native child was in this country, if that child ended up in social services or was going to be adopted, they had to contact the tribal nation from which that tribe was either a citizen or eligible for citizenship. People were very happy to finally get a law in the books. So remember I told you I have a 14-year-old, correct? She's an amazing young woman. I can't imagine my life without her. Biologically, she is my great niece. Thankfully, when my niece, I didn't know my niece had even been born. She was my brother's grandchild. He had been married. He and his wife divorced. She was killed in a car accident. Before they notified my brother, his former wife's family had gone to court and gotten custody of his daughter. The Indian Child Welfare Act wasn't enforced. So she grew up in Kentucky. She had 2 daughters that we knew about. We kept track of them. I called, see how they were doing. What we didn't know was those 2 children were removed by social services. The Indian Child Welfare Act was not enforced. We didn't know they had been removed. When my 14-year-old, who's now 14-year-old, when she was 6 months, no, when she was 4 months old, she went into the system. The social worker who was given her case, she knew about the Indian Child Welfare Act. How did she know? She was a social worker. She vacationed in Cherokee, North Carolina, where our lands are, the eastern band of Cherokee. So when she got a document that said the child was Cherokee, what did she do? She picked up the phone and she called the tribe. The tribe called my brother. My brother called me. He at the time wasn't in a position to raise his grandchild. He was raising his current wife's grandchild at the time. And it was a no-brainer. I mean, this was our child. This was our baby. And she is our baby, 100%. So when the Indian Child Welfare Act is being challenged, we were fearful across Indian country that they could take away this law, that even though judges, attorneys, social workers, people who are supposed to know our laws, even when they don't know, at least they're on the books. As a judge, I attend judicial conferences. And I was at a judicial conference where the Indian Child Welfare Act was being discussed, and they were talking about, the role of judges in the enforcement of this act. And one of the women in the audience stood up and said, you know, we don't have Native children in Kentucky. My nieces lived in Kentucky. Just because you live in a state that might not have a federally recognized tribe does not mean that you do not have Native people as your neighbors. And we have large Native communities in cities. So part of the beauty of this organization, and the reason I'm so thankful for coming, is because it's an opportunity for me to share a little bit of information with you and to challenge you in whatever work that you're doing, to be inclusive and to educate yourself about the Native people in this country, because we are in crisis. Our women and girls, Google murdered and missing Indigenous women. Google the Indian Child Welfare Act. These are things that we have to deal with. But don't misunderstand. We come from strong communities, and we are resilient, and we are beautiful and smart and intelligent, and we have everything to bring to a conversation. Invite us to your tables and let us join you in this fight to protect gender equity for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. That was such an incredible story, Brenda, and I really appreciate you being so vulnerable and sharing with us. It was really impactful.
I think we're being pulled away. But as I go, I would encourage you, if you want to learn more, there are places that you can go. There's the Indian Law Resource Center, the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, as well as the Native American Rights Fund. Just Google American Indian Affairs, and there is a lot of information available, but you have to work for it. It's not easily accessible. Thank you.